So the Nazis were developing a space plane. And remember, this is 20 years before space travel even exists. But during World War II, the Nazis were developing the plane with the intention of bombing American targets, including New York City. What's even crazier is that the guys who were in charge of the project ended up in some very unlikely places. And it's really crazy. I kind of laugh a little bit, but not because World War II or the Nazis is like a funny thing, but it's just crazy. It's almost unfathomable how some of this stuff happened and it's just wild. Like it's a wild story. So anyway, the Silbervogel, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, which is German for silver bird, was a design for a liquid propellant rocket powered suborbital bomber that was to be used by the Germans in their America Bomber project during World War II. And what's fascinating is that that project was an initiative by the German Ministry of Aviation to obtain a long range strategic bomber that would be capable of striking the United States from Germany in either or a round trip scenario. And that was kind of what they had first thought, or a situation where they would fly across the entire United States. And then, as I think the plan ended up going, and I'll get into that more later, the other option would be to just fly it over the entirety of the United States and then land somewhere in the Pacific where the Japanese had maybe like a base or an airport. And so the round trip distance from Germany to the United States and back was sitting at, or it sits at approximately 7,200 miles. And so that's why they needed the new type of bomber, because at this point in time, the planes that they already had weren't capable of going and coming back without refueling. And for this type of mission, you basically need to be able to fly over here, drop the bomb, and then head right back. And so it was going to take a new design, and that's where the Silverbird comes in. So on December 3rd, 1941, two manned and one unmanned version of the aircraft were proposed. The manned version of the aircraft, in particular, was to be launched at a very steep angle, and after dropping its bomb load on New York City, was going to continue across the United States and then go land in a base in the Pacific that the Japanese controlled. Now, other aspects of the project that were later discovered were really wild, and one of them was the fact that they found a list of 19 other military targets in the United States that the Germans were thinking about bombing, and they once again would need this new type of bomber to reach all of them. But some of these targets included Alcoa, Pratt and Whitney, General Motors, and Chrysler. And basically, the reason they would target these types of companies is because those are the type of companies America was using to build a lot of our war effort, and so they're targets of military importance. But essentially, what would the plan would be there would basically be that this bomber would fly up to suborbital space. So it's so high up that we can't shoot it out of the sky, and then it was going to fly, and also it would be hard to detect on radar, is my understanding. And then it would fly across the Atlantic Ocean. And then as it went over New York City, it would drop bombs on New York City. And then it would continue on a flight path that would take it over some of these parts of the country. Think about it. You could fly theoretically from New York and then start making your way through into the Midwest, where you have some of these companies like a Chrysler or General Motors, right? There were a lot of targets in like Pennsylvania and Indiana, a lot of these manufacturing hubs for the American war machine. And so as it would just travel across America from fucking space, they were just going to drop bombs the whole way through and then go land in the Pacific Ocean. And this was a serious plot that they had. This was at the point where they were actually building components of it. And ultimately, what ended up happening was that all of the aircraft designs that were under consideration for the entire project, and the Silverbird was just one of them. So there were a couple other designs that they were considering, but they were deemed either too expensive or too ambitious, and they ended up abandoning those projects for more practical weapons research. Hitler was a little bit more concerned with things that they could use right away. And this project was also taking place as obviously America is involved in the war already. And so once we kind of got involved, things started to take a turn. I'm not saying that's just necessarily because of us. My personal opinion is that has everything to do with the Russian front in World War II, to be honest. I don't know how much of a huge difference that we made. And I know people might get upset about that, but The history kind of points to that. But anyway, regardless, the point being, at this point in the war, Hitler kind of, I think, saw that he was starting to run into some serious issues, and so he wanted to focus on more practical technologies, things that they could use right away.